Hey, this is Matt. Welcome back to the channel, guys, where I'm going to be sharing with you how to enhance your hair transplant with SMP, Scalp Micropigmentation, for all of you guys who don't know what SMP means. Now, the good thing about this strategy is that no matter how high of a Norwood you are, you can still utilize this combination of SMP and hair transplant to an extent and make your end result look much better than you would have otherwise been able to do with hair transplant only. And before we start with the video, this video has been brought to you by Go Fiber, which are hair building fibers you can use to mask any thinning or any patchy areas on your scalp to make your hair look thicker and better. So make sure you check out the link in the video description below where you can visit Go Fiber, get a free sample of your choice, try them out and see if you like them. Number one thing, who is a good candidate for enhancing his hair transplant with SMP? You are somebody with thin hair, like myself, okay? This is me, this is my hair transplant. I have pretty thin hair. So despite of that, I decided to get a hair transplant, and many guys in my position still decide to get their hair transplant because they pretty much want their hair back. Even though they want, it's not gonna have like super high density with one surgery only, as opposed to somebody with much thicker hair in diameter, okay? So since we know it's harder to create high density result with thin hair, and doctors don't want to do it, especially not for the first session already, because they want to increase the graft survival rate, they don't want to increase chance of necrosis, they don't want to do like super high dense packing right away with the first session, and so on and so on. And that's why they start with a more conservative density. But of course, if these hairs then grow and you have thin hair, then the result will not be as dense. It may look natural. There are many natural results after hair transplant with thin hair, but the density is not always so high as a guy in his 20s or early 30s would expect, you know, because us guys in our 20s, early 30s, we expect still some pretty good density, okay? And that's why adding SMP is a good idea in such case, okay? And also, if you get a hair transplant as a guy with thin hair, obviously you will want to get second hair transplant to add more density. But you know, there should come a point in your life when you decide, when you should decide not to waste any more grafts on your frontal third, maybe just to extract more from the donor, put them here, just add more density. There should be a point in your life when that hair greed should stop, and you should be like, all right, let's rather do SMP and spare these grafts for future hair loss in case you recede further, which you very likely probably will if you are still in your 20s right now and 30s and you got already a hair transplant on the front, okay? So this is why SMP is great. All right, guys, as an example, I'd like to share with you this before and after result of a patient from Scalp Studio. And although they didn't specify whether the patient was or wasn't a prior hair transplant patient or not, I mean, if we take a look at the hairline, we actually can see that it was actually a hair transplant, very likely, because we see that the thinning is not that natural, that the thinning pattern is not so natural. I mean, it could be also like natural hair loss, but in my opinion, it was a hair transplant and the density wasn't as good as the patient was hoping for. But it doesn't really matter here, even if it's not a hair transplant. I just want to illustrate that somebody who is in a similar situation, maybe you have done a hair transplant, it's actually looking like this, maybe a little better or even worse, I don't know. What you can do in such case, instead of, you know, shooting for another hair transplant, you can get scalp micropigmentation and make it look visually better. Now, of course, this is not the most perfect result in my opinion, and I can share with you what are the flaws in my opinion of this SMP. First of all, if we zoom in, we see that the pigmentation could have been done a little bit more denser, especially, well, obviously if we zoom out, it's looking much denser and fuller, and you cannot see that it's a pigmentation maybe. Maybe on a bright sunlight you can see it better, but anyways, it's looking good. But the problem is, if the patient would want to maybe buzz that hair off, I think that the pigmentation is not dense enough, you know. So not every square, like if we would kind of measure it in terms of square centimeter next to square centimeter of that area, we would see some gaps which could have been filled out either with additional grafts or additional pigmentation, and that's why it wouldn't look so homogeneously covered with you know, with pigment or with grafts in this case, and thus make that result look flawless if the patient would want to buzz that hair shorter or maybe even like on a couple millimeters. Okay, it may not look so flawless, so smooth, especially if you buzz it off. Of course, if you don't want to buzz it off, if you want to do long hair scalp micropigmentation, then I think it's just much more important that the hairline will not be over pigmented, which actually they did well here. You should not over pigment the frontal hairline, because then it's not going to look like a soft start of the hairline, and especially if the hair growing on the hairline, as we can see here, it's not very dense, right? The density is not so high actually, so you don't want to over pigment that hairline, because then it's not going to look soft. You will make it actually more robust and more artificial and more like weird. It's not going to look natural. And what you want to do, you want to start with less density and then add more density of these pigmented dots as the hairline is progressing towards the mid scalp, towards the frontal forelock. Okay, which seems like actually they did right in this case, but again, you are not flexible if you want to buzz that hair shorter, because then you will probably need to visit the SMP artist again, and he will need to add more pigment to some areas, because they're not going to be filled out. But again, if you decide to rock a rather mid to long hair as the patient here, then it's going to look good also, even if the pigmentation hadn't been done very dense. Okay, again, before and after result, obviously a good improvement. So if you are somebody who is very young, you have done already a hair transplant on the front, you are thinking about adding more density or SMP, but you don't know whether the hair loss will or will not go aggressively in the future, your donor is already limited, you probably are not like a super responder to finasteride and minoxidil either, so maybe you're just managing the hair loss somewhat, but it's not like the super hair saver for you. You're not like this hyper responder either. So in such case, it makes sense to buy yourself some time, get SMP right now, and think about hair transplant later on. And I mean, you can always get another hair transplant even on that same area which had been already transplanted and pigmented, so it's all right. Okay, you're just buying yourself some time with this approach. Okay, so this is something you can consider, of course. Now here's another patient with also dark hair who got several hair transplants, but still he felt like he lacked density, as you can see it here in the comment, and this is already the result after. And on the left you can see that the density is not that bad actually, considering it's a hair transplant, and we know that hair transplants provide like 50, maximum maybe 60% of the original density, so it's good. But you see how the expectations of the patient still are not being met sometimes, even after many surgeries, hair transplant surgeries on the same area. So in such case you have to add SMP to make it look darker and fuller optically, and I think he should be finally happy right now, because I mean, it looks really nice. It looks really good to me. It looks like this crew cut, like this military, haircut. It does look good. And this is a very close-up photo. So if you see him from afar, I mean, you would probably never tell that this is a hair transplant, SMP, and all that combined. Okay, so again, this big photo is the after photo, and the small one here is the before picture. Okay, now another point as to who is a good candidate for utilizing hair transplant with scalp micropigmentation, and that would be somebody with dark hair. I'm talking about the ideal candidate, okay? If you don't have dark hair, you still can do this. However, you are not considered the ideal candidate. I'm gonna explain you why. Because depositing dark pigment into the epidermis with scalp micropigmentation has been shown to have much higher, not only success rate, but also the wow effect. All right, before I share with you some results on dark hair, I wanna share with you also some results with blonde hair. And although many SMP artists will tell you that it's possible, and yes, it can look natural, and it does look natural, like on this before and after photo here, you can see that the result is very soft. It's not a big transformation, or as big of a transformation as by somebody with dark hair. It's just not as eye-catching, I would say. The same with here. Also here with this gentleman here, see if the head will be flashed with light, you almost it seems like the guy is bald, like you don't see any SMP on top. Almost the same here. Okay, that's just my impression. On the other hand, if we take a look at somebody with darker hair, like for example this gentleman who actually had done a hair transplant before on his hairline, we can see that it just looks much more defined after. This gentleman who also, by the way, got a hair transplant before, and his hairline was actually improperly done, but that's another discussion. He decided to have a touch-up of scalp micropigmentation, and you can see the before and after result is much more it just looks better. It's more eye-catching, at least in my opinion. You can comment below what you think, but you know, the definition looks better. They also recreated his temple point with SMP, and it just looks really good. You know, it just looks good. Obviously they camouflage also the FUT scar from his hair transplant, and I don't really know if the hair transplant was a success on his front, because he shaved his hair, so I don't know if the hair grew from his transplant or not, but nonetheless I see there is some definition on his hairline, so at least some of the hair must have grown from the transplant, but they decided to pretty much create you know, add more pigmentation on this area, and thus made it look more denser and fuller, thicker. Also his crown, look at his crown, it was like half bald, and here on the right side you can see it's already filled. It at least appears to be filled. So this is an example of somebody who has dark hair and how it can look after SMP. Obviously this patient has also tanned complexion. Let's take a look at somebody who is more like pale. Let's take a look. Maybe we find somebody who's more pale, like this guy. He also had FUE hair transplant surgery, but was unhappy with the density. This is obviously something which can happen, and this goes back to the first point which I was telling you about somebody having very thin hair, and no matter how much you will try, you will want to add more density and more density with next and next transplant. You still may not be as happy, and you come to the point where you are wasting so many grafts, and that's why going with SMP in such case is a really good idea, like this guy did. Look at that. They also moved the hairline lower, especially on his corners, and added more darkness or definition optically with scalp micropigmentation. They filled the crown as well, and look at that. It's really good, to be honest, if we take a look at it here. And we can also see the grafts of, for some of you guys who have trained eyes like myself, you can see some hairs kind of sticking out. These are the transplanted grafts from the previous hair transplant, and they added pigmentation in between, and also created some nice micro irregularities on the hairline and made it look soft, which is really good. It's a good result. Another good candidate for hair transplant enhancement with scalp micropigmentation would be, unfortunately, somebody who has already undergone a hair transplant, but the hair transplant ended up being unsuccessful. Okay, we're going to be taking a look at some examples in a moment, but first I want to say that based on how unsuccessful the hair transplant was, especially talking about the hairline and temples, maybe they have been restored in a very aggressive way, maybe there are some multiple follicular units implanted, and it makes it look very robust. In such case, it actually makes sense not to camouflage that right away with scalp micropigmentation, but rather have these grafts extracted, removed permanently, either via, you know, extraction, the follicular unit extraction with a, you know, manual or automated tool, usually manual, because it's being done on the forehead here. It's better to use manual, or you can laser it, have it lasered off. You can do both strategies. Ideally, if you want to reuse that follicle, you need to have it extracted with a tool, a surgical tool, again, like a manual extraction, so the surgeon can reuse that follicle elsewhere. But if you don't care, you will have it lasered off, and then after it heals, you go get your scalp micropigmentation and make the result look ideal. The same can be said about the donor area. In case the donor area has been over harvested after your hair transplant, you have the FUT scar, or you have a severely over harvested moth-eaten look on the donor area by several FUEs, or sometimes even by one FUE of maybe several thousands grafts, like 4,000 plus grafts. It can also lead to overharvesting by some individuals, and then you can have SMP done on that area. Okay, now let's take a look at some examples because these are also good candidates for scalp micropigmentation. If we take a look, for example, at this gentleman, he got a hair transplant on the frontal third, and you see the regular placement of the graft. It's just very regular placement. It's not very natural, and if he buzzes it off, you can pretty much see the rows one after the other, and there is no random placement, and that's why adding scalp micropigmentation can camouflage that and pretty much refocus the human eye from looking at that like a regular pattern and see it more like something more random. And that's what they did as well. And he also decided to let the hair grow longer on the after photo, and it just looks fuller, and you cannot see these rows as much. Imagine that there would be no SMP done on this after photo. We would be able to pretty much see much more regular hairs growing in these rows, and it wouldn't look very good. He also can consider having these grafts removed because these are not properly placed grafts. For some of you guys it may look like it's like pretty much like straight, it goes like this with the temple, but it actually, maybe that's the only thing that's kind of all right, which is in line, but it doesn't make it look natural. I see that these are many multiple follicular units which are implanted here, and ideally you need to have them removed or need to keep cutting or trimming them forever, because once these hairs grow much longer, they will look very robust and it's very unnatural, and people will immediately spot it. And I had this happen to me, and that's why I had some grafts removed from the left and right corner myself. So if he wants to have it like natural, in the future, ideally have this removed or lasered off. Maybe add some singles in this area, or if he doesn't want to do any transplant anymore, then add pigmentation in this area after these grafts had been already removed. Here on the left photo, we can also see how they camouflaged his donor area with pigmentation, because on the right you can see how severely over harvested his donor area got, and I have no idea who did this. Extracting this is not a homogeneous extraction at all, okay? When it comes down to FUE, they just took a very limited area of his donor, and they also went way too low, by the way. They went way too low, and they extracted so many grafts from this low portion here, which is already on the border with the non-safe zone, or maybe already a part of the non-safe zone itself, and that's not good. All right, guys, at the end, I would like to talk about one more aspect of scalp micropigmentation and hair transplant. If you are somebody with existing hair on the hairline, you always make it easier for the SMP artist to create a natural result, because the hairline is still there, so it's easier for him to create more natural result if he just adds more pigment in between, like you can see on this client or on this client, as opposed to somebody who is a complete Norwood 5 or 6 already, and he wants to have this hairline designed. In such case, it maybe makes sense to really keep searching for the best possible artist who can get this right on patient like Norwood 5, 6 and higher, who wants to have a natural looking hairline, because sometimes it seems like these SMP artists can not always get it right, and maybe it could also make sense to get a hair transplant first on the hairline, just to create some softness around the hairline with actual hairs, which like excellent hair transplant doctor could really get right and create some good hairline, and then go to SMP artist to get SMP, so he can much more easily hit that naturalness on the hairline, 10 out of 10 naturalness almost, because you already have some existing hair there to work with. So this is one thing that I've been noticing for a while on all of these results. Don't get me wrong, some guys, some SMP artists are really skilled, not so many of them, however, who can really do that soft hairline on the Norwood 6. They can do it very well, but maybe, I don't know, maybe the patient really wanted something more defined. I don't know, maybe it's his choice, maybe maybe he's loving it, he's 10 out of 10 happy with it, and in such case it's great. But I'm just saying that yeah, it's maybe not the most natural way how this could have been done. But I hope you enjoyed that. If you're new to my channel, make sure you like this video and subscribe. Check out my free Facebook group, Hair Transplant Experiences, with over 2,800 members in the group. Check out my website, mattdominance.com. If you want to inform yourself about how to get hair transplant done the proper way, you can check out several of my hair transplant related guides on how to research your hair transplant doctor properly, best hair transplant doctors collection worldwide, also best hair transplant clinics in Turkey, and so on. You can also get on a one-on-one consultation with me, obviously, and we can discuss your steps towards getting your hair back one-on-one. So with that being said, thank you so much for watching. I'm going to see you in another video. Do you want to have less stress and more success with your hair transplant like many of my clients before you already? Then make sure you apply for this one single call, very important call, which can help you minimize all the possible mistakes you could do throughout your hair transplant research. A call with an expert in this field which can help you maximize the chance of you ending up with a successful hair transplant. If you like that, make sure you swipe up right now and get on a one-on-one call with me.